monetary considerations, you can get away with paying very little for it. But on the other hand, NSN really would like people to donate extra money because this is costing some. So there's going to be kind of a cost that's negotiable, probably with two or three different levels.
Yeah, that's what Tejas Storytelling Festival is doing. They and it's an honor system. They say if you are hurting financially because of the pandemic, just donate what you can
Sure.
afford, or nothing at all, and donate
But
later
also,
when you're better off.
one of the things, depending on how the finances of the group are going, is that storytelling groups and organizations can become sponsors for this event and get some perks out of it. So I will have more information about that also.
Okay. So Ron, hi. You can unmute yourself if you want to say something.
Hello.
So we haven't started stories yet. We're just sort of sharing different things. And I'm going to have to do this again. We're talking about different online events. There, I just entered it into chat again because you came in after I'd entered it before, and you only get to see in chat what's put in chat after you're connected.
Thank you.
Anyway, there's 3 links in there that may be of use. And as I told the other people, I can tell you too, I got a very informative email from Jim Diekman from Storytellers of San Diego about how he set up their YouTube channel. And I'm going to hopefully be doing that within the next month.
Good, good.
And I am recording this tonight, just to let you all know you're being recorded. And then we can, and I can go back to our celebration and put that up on our YouTube channel when it's up and running. And I kind of like the idea of what Storytellers San Diego do. They have the event as a video, but they also have individual storytellers. So you can just click on one story. Listen, if that's all that you have time for, you go there, click on one story, and then come back later and click on another story, and don't have to worry about where you left off in the concert. I think it's a fairly good idea.
Well, if you're willing to devote the work, the thing is that does take a little bit of time to edit down the way he does.
Yeah. But one thing he pointed out, after you do it a few times, it becomes much more quickly done. You know, and
sure.
You become more efficient at doing it. And I've worked a little bit with iMovie myself, so I'm not entirely unfamiliar with it.
Well, if you're just using iMovie to edit it into chunks, it's not as hard. The video people I'm working with on the stuff, I guess some of you may not know, I've been doing storytelling videos for Pasadena Library and for the KPAS TV and online station. And the thing is, they're doing full editing on it because I'm sitting there in front of a green screen and they are literally editing in the library behind me. So when you look at it, it looks like I'm sitting in front of the folktale section at the Pasadena Central Library. But that is in fact a digital version of the folktale section at the Pasadena Library.
Right, right.
But they were saying that a full edit of something like that, including the digital work involved, takes as much as 45 minutes for each story.
Whoa.
And so what you're talking about should take only 5 or 10 minutes per story at most.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, we have quite a library of stories already recorded, and the Black History Month ones should be going live this week. But yes, that's been one of my key projects the last few months.
And I think you gave us the links to that in the past.
I gave you the links to the early ones. there are more stories than there were when I gave you those, but they will be in that same place.
Yeah. Do you happen to know what it is? Could you put that in our chat tonight?
Sure. I can do that in just a moment.
Okay. And it looks like we're going to have a small group tonight. I actually didn't.
Oh, the word is intimate, John.
Intimate.
Yes.
Right. I did not learn a new story. I could practice an old story. Do you have anything for tonight, Elizabeth?
Yes, I have also a story that I tell before. It's about Philemon and Baucis from the mythology. And I think it's a good story for February with the Valentine's Day and things.
Yeah. And do you have one tonight, Ron? Good. Good. How about you, Nick? Do you have one tonight?
Sure, I've got one I can tell.
Okay. Well, who wants to go first? Raise your hand if you want to go first.
I can go first.
Okay, so I'm going to mute myself, and everybody else mute yourself while Elizabeth tells her.
Well, this story comes to us from very, very long time. Actually, it is a story from the mythology. So we are talking thousands of years back. And it is a simple story about human feelings, and people try to help and be kind to each other. So the story goes this way. One time, also, I want to make a note that the mythology has the same stories, or most of them are practically the same from the Greek mythology and the Roman mythology, except that the deities have different names, but they have the same functions. So if we go to with the Greek mythology, which kind of I like better, at one point, Zeus, he was the head god, the main god, presiding over the Mount Olympus, which was the place where the gods were congregating. So Zeus take with him the god of commerce and travel, which was Mercury. And they said, well, let's just go down on the earth and see how the mortals are doing, if everything is good, if they get along with each other and such. So they got down on the earth. They found a little village somewhere on some hills, and they disguised themselves in travelers, very modest travelers, and tired. And by the evening time, where people were supposed to be inside the houses from their daily work and getting ready for dinner and then go to bed, they start knocking at the doors, try to see if somebody will offer them a place to stay and a little food. And to their amazement and disappointment, nobody really accepted them. Everybody is away, didn't open the doors, or if they opened, they said, we are tired, we don't have room for travelers, try somebody else. The night was falling down, kind of dark outside, well, a village, of course. So finally, by the end of the village, close to some hills, it was this very modest dwelling, and they knocked at the door. A man came out, and they told them, we are traveling and we got, it's too late to go farther, if we can stay overnight. And the man said, yeah, come in. It's just my wife and myself, but I have to tell you, everything would be very modest. The room and the food would be very modest, but we are glad to share with you for the evening. So they got inside. The lady of the house, she served food, was plenty, very modest, but plenty. And they had this pottery, this jug with wine on the table. So let's assume is Greek. So wine is more current than water. So they were helping with the wine and the food, and they were talking about different things. And very strange, toward the end of the meal and the conversation, when they were getting ready to go to bed, everybody, the man of the house observed that the wine jar never got empty. No matter how much they were serving, the wine was still the same in the jug. So he started thinking about that. This must be somebody very different, somebody probably even a deity or somebody not very like a regular human being. So they went to bed, and the next morning, the couple, the visitors, went with their trip, and everything kind of got quiet. Then, a short time after that, they got a message. And the message was, you were so kind with Zeus and Mercury, without knowing who they were, that you are asked to become the custodians of a temple that was built on the top of the hills. And they want you to be the custodians of this temple until the end of your lives. So, of course, they were really very happy, but also frightened by this experience. And they went over there, they start taking good care of the temple, and the time goes by. And sure enough, one time it comes this tremendous storm with water rising, and that entire village was completely erased from the face of the world, from the face of the earth. So they got away with their lives because they were in the temple, and the temple was high on the hills. This couple were very loyal to each other, very loving, and as they grew old, they confessed to each other that they would like to go away together. They don't want to be alone on the earth if the other one will pass away. So this was their main and strongest desire for the end of their life. So they asked Zeus to grant them this wish. And Zeus did. And by the time went for them to pass away, they passed away together. And they turned into an oak and the linden tree, and they are intertwined in the neighborhood of the temple that they served their lives with devotion. So that's the story. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Okay, who would like to be next? Somebody raise your hand. Okay, Nick. And Ron, you can be after Nick. I'm going to mute myself and Nick will begin.
All right. Now, this is one of the stories I just recorded recently for the website, so it's mostly fresh in my mind, but you never know. It's the end of a long day. Now, once there was a man who was so short that he only came up as tall as most people's kneecaps. And so people made fun of him and called him the knee-high man. Now, do you think he liked being called that? Why, no, sir, he did not. But it was a fact. He was only as tall as most people's knees, and that frustrated him just enormously. And he really wanted to be as tall as other folks, bigger and stronger. And he was just so saddened by the fact that he was so short. Well, finally, he decided he should go out and learn how to be taller and bigger and stronger. And so he went out and thought to himself, now who's taller and bigger and stronger than I am? Well, most everybody, but who's around that I could ask? And there in a pasture, he saw a big, strong, fast horse. And he went up to the fence of that pasture and said, excuse me, Mr. Horse, but can you tell me how you got big and strong and fast? And the horse had to think about that for a minute because, he'd always been a horse and horses get to be big and strong and fast on their own. But he thought and said, well, every day the farmer feeds me a bucket of oats in addition to the grass I eat out here. And every day I run around the pasture. That may make my legs stronger. I don't know if it made me bigger, but it couldn't hurt. And the knee-high man said, thank you, Mr. Horse. And he went back and got himself a whole bunch of oats. And every day he started himself out with as many oats as he could eat, and then spent as much of the day as he could stand running back and forth as fast and far as he could. And at the end of about a month of doing this, his stomach hurt from eating all those oats because they're not the best food for a person to eat as their only food. And his legs hurt because he was running back and forth every day, faster and farther than his little legs were really meant for. So he thought, well, at least I must have gotten taller. And he went and measured himself, and he was not 1/2 inch taller than he'd started out. And he thought, well, that's no good. I'll have to ask somebody else. And he walked farther down the road and found another farm, and there in the field of that farm was a big old bull. And that bull was stomping and snorting. And the knee-high man went up to the fence and said, excuse me, Mr. Bull, but I have an important question to ask you. How did you get so big? Well, nobody had ever asked the bull that before. And the bull thought and said, well, I eat all the grass I can and stomp and snort and do all of that and chase off anybody that worries me. Maybe that's how I got so big. I've had a lot of practice doing those things. And the knee-high man said, oh, thank you so much, Mr. Bull. And he went home and started cutting the grass from the lawn in front of his house and chewing on it. Now you have to understand that cutting the grass in front of your house and chewing on it isn't very tasty. And so he thought, I sure hope it's the stomping and snorting that helps. And he began to stomp and snort and chew on as much grass as he could stand and stomp and snort. And if anybody came up to his house and wanted to pester him, he would run at them and go, snort, stomp. And they'd think he was crazy and go running off. But at the end of a month of doing that, he was not 1/2 inch taller. And he thought, oh, I failed again. I know. I've asked folks who were big. I need to ask somebody who's smart. And he looked and looked and looked in the forest until he found the biggest old owl he could find sitting up there in a tree. And he said, excuse me, Mr. Owl. And the owl looked and blinked and said, who's down there? It's me. Folks call me the knee-high man, and I hate that name, and I've been trying to get bigger, and nothing seems to work. Could you tell me how to get bigger? And the owl blinked and said, who told you you need to be bigger? And the knee-high man said, it's just, I'm tired of being so short. And if somebody challenges me to a fight, they'd whip me for sure. And the owl said, who has ever challenged you to a fight? And the knee-high man thought about it and said, well, nobody, I guess. I guess folks would laugh at them for fighting somebody little. But I'd sure like to be able to see as far as folks who are tall, because down here I can't see very far at all. And the owl looked and said, who said that's the only way to see far? Climb up here with me and let me show you something. Well, the knee-high man climbed up that tree and out onto the little branch where the owl was. Now, said the owl, who can see farther than we can? A tall man would be way down there. Look what you can see. And the knee-high man looked out all round him, and he could see for miles. He could see things that were at the tops of the shorter trees. He could look down and see animals off in the distance moving. And besides, said the owl, if you were big and tall, you couldn't sit on this branch without it breaking and you falling to the ground. And the knee-high man thought to himself and said, well, I guess you're right. I just wanted to be big. And the owl said, maybe it's not your body that needed to be bigger. Keep exercising the brain inside your head and make that big, and you can do anything. Well, thank you, Mr. Owl, said the knee-high man. And he climbed down from that tree and went home. And nobody ever did pick a fight with him. And anytime he wanted to see far, he climbed up high. And anytime he wanted to know more, he studied on it himself. He never did ask that horse or that bull for advice ever again. And that's the story of the knee-high man.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. That was great. Where does that come from?
That's actually an African-American folk tale from the South. The first time I ran across it was when Julius Lester was collecting a bunch of African-American folk tales, including rewriting some of the Uncle Remus stories into a more readable accent.
Yeah.
Because the Joel Chandler Harris thing, we're trying to do phonetic versions of Gullah. And that's why the accents in those are so weird, because Gullah is a very peculiar accent. And I'm not sure Joel Chandler Harris even understood some of the words they were saying. So, but Julius Lester did collections about, I would say 20, 30 years ago, where he found stories that he liked. And so he put them into several little volumes. The Knee-High Man is in one of those. And I've seen it in a bunch of other places since, but that's where I first encountered it.
All right.
Great story, Nick. Great story.
Great story. Yeah. Okay, Ron, do you want to be next?
I would.
Okay, I'm going to mute.
In the few days between the Super Bowl and President's Day every year, I tend to reflect on the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. In doing so, I'm always reminded of his most famous, if not most important, speech, the Gettysburg Address, which of course is nothing less than American scripture. I know the more important speech may be the second inaugural, but I, like many people, I think, favor the Gettysburg. For many of us, it would be a positive experience and a reflective one to think back on it, um, recognizing, I guess, that the fact that in distant days when, well, we had to memorize that speech by a man who stood tall and spoke it with a funeral oration melancholy, under gently weeping skies, under Farmer Getty's or upon Farmer Getty's bloodied fields on that gray November day in 1863. It is, of course, as they say, altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But for me, there was more than a little pain and a lot of pathos in all of this, such dedication and consecration, as we say. For as a speech, it had indeed long endured. I'd never heard of the Gettysburg Address until the 5th grade. All I knew was that he was a figure, rather serious, whiskered as he was, hung in a portrait above the blackboard right next to George Washington in our 5th grade classroom. But our teacher, Miss Williams, introduced us to this famous speech, not as a landmark of American democracy, but really as a form of punishment. She taught the 5th grade for forever. I mean, may have had Lincoln in class, as far as I know. Maybe George Washington, too. I mean, she seemed to know so much about them. She was a wiry little lady, about 5'2", ramrod straight. And whenever anyone spoke in class out of turn, and you might guess who that might have been fairly often, she would just sternly eye that mouthy malcontent and look down over her wire-rimmed glasses, and with her index finger shake the number of, quote, Gettysburgs, as we called them, that we would have to write out by hand in our copybooks as punishment. Now, before I made it to the 6th grade, I must have written over 100 Gettysburgs, looping each letter in the very correct cursive style that Miss Williams insisted upon. 87 years ago. It was, of course, just 10 sentences, 272 words. I know because I counted them often. And many a strange and really unfathomable word vocabulary that I didn't understand. A score, a proposition, hallow, consecrate, endure. I had no idea what the speech meant, really. But Miss Williams took it all very seriously. And though I think she rarely read our copied works of it, I mean, why would she? She'd probably been there when he delivered it. But besides, she was a living contradiction of that classic irony, the world will little note nor long remember, because she knew it by heart. And that second inaugural, I'm sure, as well. But some of my classmates, let's call them highly resolved, their efforts shall not have died in vain, and so took a whole new birth of freedom in unfitting form of the black market. What I mean by that is that whether testing this notion or any notion so conceived and so dedicated can long endure, I mean, in short, what they did was to sell Gettysburgs to us who had unfinished work which they who struggled here had thus far so ignobly advanced. I mean, I was a farm boy. we milked cows. We didn't grow nickels. Lincoln's profile was on the penny, and I could have managed a few pennies if that's what it took. But Mr. Jefferson and Mr. Roosevelt and Mr. Washington, well, these were the only acceptable currency. And I didn't have the poor power to add or detract. And it all seems to me like a very strange and unfair way to govern of powerful people and by powerful people and against pathetic people who otherwise indeed would perish from the earth. But alas, like most of us, eventually I survived Miss Williams' class and the bullies in it too. I mean, I didn't think very much about this after I got out of that class until some years ago, living in Connecticut, and just after a Super Bowl, there was an article in the newspaper that argued that every fifth grader should be made to memorize the Gettysburg Address. I told Janet about this great battlefield and my once upon a time uncivil wartime experience, and she asked whether or not Miss Williams had herself given the last full measure of devotion, as it were. And after some research, lo and behold, we discovered that she was still living, albeit in a nursing home up in Litchfield, which is about 2 hours north of our home. And so we became highly resolved to visit. Now, well in her 90s, we found her dozing in a wheelchair in a little sunroom there in that nursing facility. And a lovely nurse ushered us in and said, Miss William, Miss William, the gentleman who called is here to look in on you. You wake up now. He and Miss Evans come a long way to see you. Well, there was a glimmer of response as her eyes fluttered a little bit, but not much more than that. So it was pretty much a one-way conversation that we had. But Nurse Lilia soon brought us in a tray of tea, flowery steaming pot, and 3 matching cups, and a plate of biscuits, and said, Miss Williams always likes to serve tea to her guests. Miss Williams always likes to serve tea. Again adding, Miss Williams, wake up now. Your visitors come a long way to see you. But alas, we could not compete with her dreams, which I hope were happy ones. She just dozed on, and so we had to make conversation by ourselves. Again, Nurse Lilia came in, looked hard at Miss Williams and said, maybe Mr. Evans, if you give her a Gettysburg, that will get her started. Lots of her old students come and give her a Gettysburg. Astonished and looking to Janet for encouragement, well, I quickly searched my memory bank and I somehow found the words. They just came flowing back from 80 all the way till shall not perish from the earth. But clearly, Miss Williams had heard it all before. So there was no need for her to wake or even nod. We tried to tell her how nice it was to see her again and told her the happy memories of her and my great gratitude, and then we all prepared to leave. And as we walked down the hallway to the lobby, Miss Lillian, the nurse, caught up with us and said, sorry, Miss Williams isn't more with it today, but she'd been here, she'd want you to have this. And Miss Lillian pulled out a bright, shiny Lincoln penny from her apron pocket and put it in my hand. Miss Williams, she said, has the whole candy dish filled with these. She seems to enjoy giving one to all her students who come by and visit. You and Miss Evans have a nice day now. I know Miss William would be happy to have you call again. I assured Miss William that we would. But alas, it was 77 years ago that our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met in a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion for that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people and by the people and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Thank you, Ron. This was just really amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, that was great. Hi, Adrian. You're muted.
Hello, how are you guys? That was wonderful, Ron. I think that is probably the best I've ever heard the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah.
You have such depth of meaning in it. I'm quite sure that is how Mr. Lincoln must have said it with such feeling.
Well done. Do you have a story for us tonight, Adrian?
Well, I was thinking kind of on this president holiday line, I guess, is kind of where there's a little theme perhaps building. And I'm kind of working on a little story because all the weird events in the last few weeks have made me kind of think about, partisanship and such. And I remember years ago when I was living in Yorba Linda, and, I'm, liberal feminist Democrat. So, hey, the fact that the Nixon, library was in town is like, well, big whoop, but I do remember from my childhood watching him resign, the whole Watergate thing. I was a very active child. My parents watched the news a lot, my mom in particular. So I knew something about him and about, what was going on a little bit. But I remember when I was living in Yorba Linda, just really down the street and around the corner from the Nixon library, it was about that time that he passed away. And I had never actually gone to the library because I thought, why? That's me and my, sort of partisan, pigheadedness. So I was like, why should I bother going there? But I thought, you know what? I have never had the opportunity, nor do I think I would ever have the opportunity of being in the same place as a former president lying in state, because he was lying in state there at the Nixon Library. So my friend Chris and I, we got in line, and we thought, oh, this will be kind of a lark, it'd be nice to pay respects, even though he was not somebody we would have voted for. And we're standing in line, we get to know people, we're talking to people. It rained, and we were one of the few people who actually had umbrellas with us. And then it stopped raining, and the sun came out, and so it was kind of a cloudy, misty day, and it was probably 4 or 5 hours that we stood in line. And as we got closer and closer and closer up to the entrance, I just kind of felt a strange, solemnity kind of building. And we went in, and they just have you very slowly kind of walk around the circular room around his casket and then file out. And that's kind of it. But I remember thinking, he was somebody's father, he was somebody's brother, he was somebody's husband, somebody's child. They replicated his childhood home on the grounds. And I thought, this is how it's supposed to be. Whether you vote for this person or not, you pay respects for the respect of the office. And I felt a tug. I'm getting a little emotional now. I felt a little tug of your heart walking past this casket of somebody who had had a very big place in history, not always for positive reasons, but he did some interesting things. He did some good things. He did some not so good things, but he was a man of power, but he was also human. And just walking past his casket, I felt like when I entered the room, by the time I exited the room, I was in a very different emotional space. And I thought, I'm so glad that my friend Chris and I decided to just, on a lark, go. It was free. Not just because I could say I was there to touch a little piece of history, but because I didn't come out of there the same person that I went in. And I'm just really glad. And I do pray for the day when that kind of cross partisanship can be as lovely and amicable, even if we disagree with each other. I pray for a day that that kind of respect and mutual respect comes back. So I was kind of thinking about that in the little presidential theme Ron got us started in. So that was kind of my story.
Thank you.
I think Nick raised his hand, yes? Oh, no.
John is muted. You're muted, John.
John, you need to unmute
Okay,
yourself.
I'm sorry. I clicked on it and I thought I had unmuted it, but it said unmute, which meant I had to click on it. Confusion. So how old were you, Adrian, when you did that?
Let's see. I was in graduate school, so I think I was in my early mid-20s. I'm trying to remember when he passed.
Yeah, I don't remember when he did.
Yeah, I think I was in my mid-ish 20s, because when I was in Yorba Linda, that's about when my dad passed, and I think that I was in my mid to late 20s at that point. But yeah, and it's not like, I would have made fun of anything, or it's like, wow, I mean, this guy is notorious in history, but it'd be really interesting. And then I just thought, no, this is also a moment in history that should touch all of us. no matter what our political leanings and affiliations.
Oh, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you.
So Angela, do you have a story for us tonight?
I don't really have a story. I'm looking forward to hearing the recording of this session because I was taking my dog for a walk. So even though I had you on my phone, I didn't really have a consistent thread.
Yeah.
I would like to share two connections though to President libraries. One is I found a piece of white wood that is about this big and this big. So here's my hands together. So like this big. And there's a tiny little square, maybe 2-inch square in the middle that's open, it's cut out. And at the bottom, there's a 3-inch square that's cut out like a mouse hole. And as soon as I saw it, I thought, that's the first draft of a design for 45's library. And there's tiny little squares because you can write what's on a tweet on a Post-it note and stick it in that little hole. And I have photos of it, but it's not on my computer. And the other night, like a couple weeks ago, I was Googling the 45 library because they are designing it. And I was just shocked, you know. It's like, I'm too late to submit my design. But if I'd like to share my screen if I could. Is that a possibility?
Sure.
Because I have something, I think we've talked about this before, but I wanted to share it if I could. So
Okay.
Share screen, okay. So here is, let's see, here it is. So I'm wondering if you're familiar with the Tiny Pricks project. Anybody?
Oh, I'm not.
So, okay, so all through 45's 4 years, women and men have been stitching what he said into embroidered fabric. So they're making a material record of what he said. So I just want to show it
When
to
you
you.
say material record, you mean literally.
Fabric,
Material record.
yes, yes. So like here's, like if you can you see this, here's one. Why do we want all these people from, and then bad word, countries coming here? And they've stitched it. And here's another quote of his. I know words, I have the best words.
I remember that.
So it's a fabric representation of what he said. And so I hope that this will end up in a museum. Well, it's in a museum. It's already a project that's on the wall at someone's house. But women, that's on Instagram. If you look at Tiny Pricks, Pricks, the Tiny Pricks project, you can see all this work, this amazing work that has been created over the 4 years of what he said. So not that, I mean, I don't really want to spend any more time in the company of what he said, right? So, but this has been a very interesting and clever project. And there are women who, like right after he gave a speech, they would post the thing that he had just said. Like they're like doing it while he's talking. So, and that just brings me to Garrison Keillor, who once said that people in Minnesota don't use guns, they just use rakes. When they want to go get a gun, they go and get their rake. And that's why the gardens are so beautiful in Minnesota, because that's how people take out their aggression.
That's a good positive way to do it. I know gardening is a great way to relieve stress for me.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a good project, is people could trade their guns in for a really good rake,
Yeah.
or a trash picker upper for city streets with a really good grip and, an ergonomically designed grip. So you can do it for a couple hours. Anyway,
could lead to
that's all.
violence by
That's what
potato.
I've got. What?
What's that?
Question?
Violence by potato.
Say again?
It could lead to violence by potato.
Yeah.
So instead of beating our swords into plowshares, we beat our rifles into garden rakes.
Mhm. When my brother and his wife sent their Christmas card last year, they showed their refrigerator and they had a quote on the fridge that said, we trade racists for refugees. I love that. Anyway,
So next month, I hope to have a story from this book.
Dancing on Blades.
Yeah, it's Rare and Exquisite Folktales from the Carpathian Mountains. And I
Where
started
are they? Where are they?
all right, I read it.
Part of Eastern Europe.
Eastern Europe somewhere. I forget what country.
But that will be Romania.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so maybe we should start reading our geography as a going.
Well, or we could embroider it.
Yeah, right.
I thought you had to use that terrain to get to Dracula's castle.
Yeah.
To get to whose castle?
Vlad Dracul, of course.
Dracula.
Yes.
Oh, you had to use the Carpathian Mountains to get there?
You can.
Oh,
I'm
Now,
not
did-
sure. It's advisable.
Did you know there are several places in our country named Transylvania?
Well, I know about Transylvania University. It's famous.
Yeah.
where is that?
It's in Kentucky.
Oh,
Wow.
I'm sure there's a perfectly good reason, but it's the kind of thing where people took names that they saw from places around the world and they're
Wow.
scattered all over certain states. Kentucky, Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana in particular.
Mhm.
So they
And they
probably have a really well-developed phlebotomy program, right?
Yeah.
you're muted, Ron.
Thank you. I think not. I think that the Transylvania, though it has the romantic association with Dracula, is more important than that in that Unitarianism, which we tend to associate with this country and Massachusetts and the Transcendentalists in the early 19th century, really began as a movement before the Reformation in Transylvania. I
Oh,
think that's where the Protestant religion or Protestant emphasis argument with Rome really was quite fervent in Transylvania 200 years before the Reformation. So I think that may be the connection.
That may be what?
That may be the connection rather than just, as we would think, Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Interesting.
Ron, can I ask a question about your story?
Yes.
Would you share about your process of putting that piece together?
Well, briefly, it's a matter of the story itself and trying to embellish it with phrases from the address, which are odd. One, because they're not of a pattern that we use. They're not just 19th century, they're really quite classical. I mean, he was so well read himself and crafted that speech exceedingly well.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of it being written on the back of an envelope on the train as he went to Gettysburg is a total fabrication. And it was preceded, of course, by a 2-hour address by a great orator, a former president of Harvard College, who was invited to give the dedication speech. It was only an afterthought that Mr. Lincoln was invited, and he readily accepted and knew that Mr. Everett would be there. And Everett went on with his speech, and then the president was introduced and gave the speech as we know it. But the phrasing is very unusual. And part of it being so difficult to memorize is a problem for everybody. The word that appears so many times. The word here appears so many times. I think there are only 5 words that are more than 4 syllables in the 272 words of it. So he was very focused on what he would say and how he was going to say it. And just picking out a few of those odd phrases to throw into the story to make it more either memorable or absurd, I'm not sure exactly which, is what happened. Well, I think you have to, I have to, at least in my own, then I have to cleanse my mind of that and get the speech right, because it is so important. I mean, I make reference to the fact that the world will little note nor long remember. I mean, that is the ultimate definition of irony. For him to say that, I'm sure believed it. But again, it's one of the most remembered pieces of spoken literature in all of American experience.
Well, and I think it speaks to his humility as well, because he just didn't think, these are comments, but they're not going to be like some big momentous thing. But they were, yeah.
I had to memorize it when I was in school.
There's a wonderful film that Ken Burns of Civil War and National Parks and other documentary fame has done called Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And it is of a school for boys, young boys in New Hampshire, Vermont, I think, just across the river from his New Hampshire home. And in this school, the boys who go to this school, it's a boarding school, all have severe learning difficulties, dyslexia, etc. And one of the requirements of all of the students of that school is that they memorize the Gettysburg Address. And this film, which is about an hour, takes you through this process of boys doing this.
Wow.
And Janet and I experienced that because we were invited to an evening when this occurs in the spring every year. And we were invited to come and experience this. And it's both thrilling and painful because it's for some, it is, the first 2 lines and that's that. And then they all, bow and thank you very much and sit down until everybody, but as it goes through the evening, the people who manage to get through the whole thing, give their recitations, and it's like quite thrilling that they have supposedly learning difficulty, but they are able then, and a greatest banner of accomplishment, to memorize one of the more difficult things that there is to memorize. It's great. I commend it.
And so you're hearing each boy one at a time present.
Yeah. And as I say, some do not get very far. And it goes through the evening, and there are more and more who do, and it's lined up that way. But before they finish the school, all of them go through this exercise, and I think it's repeated that every one of them have sooner or later through their experience in the school succeeded. It's just one of the loving things that they do.
I just love that story so much. I remember Donald Davis sharing once at a performance that when he was in 6th grade, every student in that grade had to learn to choose a poem at the top of the year. And they had to, and every Friday, the activity in that classroom was that every student would read or say that poem. And he said, as a result, at the end of the year, every kid knew like 21 poems. Because they'd heard each other meet that piece once a week for the entire school year. And I just think I would love to be a part of a project like that. Maybe it's just could be with adults, but I told it to our 5th and 6th grade teacher this summer. I mentioned it to her, but she did not jump and catch that ball. They are doing some poetry, but they're not spending an hour and a half on Friday on Zoom.
Well, it still gets me through a lot of nights that I can fall back on things that I had to memorize in grade school, but I can still remember.
I wonder if teachers still do that kind of punishment of writing something.
That's the hard part of it, that it shouldn't have been a punishment. And I've made it into that.
I remember I was sent to the principal's office one time in my school career. And
I knew the path very well, John. I'm sorry.
and it's kind of funny because I was in 6th grade, and for math, I had to go to another teacher's classroom because they divided it up according to ability. They wanted, the smartest math students, the medium math students, and the slow math students, were all segregated so the teacher concentrated teaching at a certain level. And I did not like the teacher that I had to go to for math, and I really liked my teacher. And I was a very, very shy kid. And so I was sent to the office, the principal's office, and I had to stay there until I wrote 100 times, "I will not speak out of turn in class."
Oh.
And when my regular teacher found out, he laughed and laughed and laughed. "John talking? Oh, that is so funny."
Oh man.
Oh dear. Oh dear. Yeah.
When I was in boarding school, if we got demerits for something, like if we didn't make our bed or we left a mess in our room, they would give us a mark was half an hour, a demerit was an hour. And what that meant was on Saturdays, we had to go to a basement room in the freshman dorm and sit inside 3-sided desks, wooden desks, so you couldn't see, beyond it. And we had to copy out of encyclopedias. You could choose any encyclopedia that you wanted. And I kind of liked it. I was fine. It just meant you didn't get to go to town that day. You were stuck at school and you had to copy out. So I figured out that I could choose any encyclopedia I wanted. And I don't remember what I chose, but I chose something that I was interested in. And I was also very obsessed with handwriting. And I loved playing with handwriting and writing with my fountain pen really small and round or slanting it one way or the other. So I was like, I was fine. It didn't bother me. But we did have one student who in her senior year, she got demerits. And what they did with these papers after we handed them in is they would be given to the headmaster's wife. And so the English teacher, Miss Dunn, happened to be in the headmaster wife's office one day near the end of the school year, and she saw the pile of papers on her desk, and the headmaster's wife wasn't there. And she just flipped through it, and she found Amy Burt's paper. And Amy Burt had not copied out of the encyclopedia, and she had explicitly written down her sexual experiences.
Oh,
Nobody looked at it, huh?
The English teacher pulled it. But she had just completely, apparently, just detailed, just pages, like 2 hours of writing of
way
stuff.
to go,
Isn't that
Amy.
awesome?
Oh, that's
I
hysterical.
love that story. And I am actually, I just got back in touch with Miss Dunn, just like like 6 months ago. She's still teaching.
Cool.
Wow.
And if ever there was a physical female figure that would match Ichabod Crane, as in tall and lanky and thin, it was Miss Dunn. No, she wasn't awkward and like him, but she was probably 6'5"
Whoa.
Wow.
and really thin legs, and we all had to wear dresses to school. So wool skirts and cashmere sweaters or blazers and, Oxford-like shoes and stockings or tights, and glasses and shoulder length hair. And she was our theater director in the early years too,
Wow.
But didn't she do a good thing when she pulled Amy Burt's expose,
Yeah.
her debut novel?
Oh man.
Was she specifically looking for that? She knew it was going to be there.
I don't know. When I was told that story, it sounded like she was just sort of casually in there, waiting for Dr. Greer's wife, Harriet, to come back, who was also just a lovely lady. We're talking 68 to 72, right? So these very tailored, dressed people, and she just it sounded like they would staple the pages together, and she was just like flipping through, and she saw Amy's and she pulled it.
Oh man.
And I heard about Amy the year I got there. When I was taken on my tour, they told about Amy Burt. She wrote on a desk, or more than one. And so this is a freshman. She had to clean all the desks in a classroom with Comet. So she scrubbed all the desks clean, which were like this Formica wood surface. And then she came up in the living room and she spread Comet all over the rugs. These old, beautiful carpets on the floor of the living room, which was the second room you would go into when you were visiting the school. And when I heard that story on my tour and interview, I started laughing. And my mother later reprimanded me for that, because it just seemed like such a far shot. Desks, which is like 2 buildings away, to this is the oldest girls' school that's still running.
Where?
In Tyrone, Pennsylvania, the Greer School for Girls, like 1859.
Wow.
And I loved it there. My parents had friends who'd sent their daughter, and they were looking for some place to send me, because in our family, as soon as you hit high school, you were sent away.
Wow.
So,
what part of Pennsylvania is that?
Tyrone is 45 minutes from Penn State.
Oh, so that's northern. Yeah.
We used to go to Penn State for our cultural activities, plays and opera and music. I saw the Three Sisters done at Penn State, and the actor who was in that production was later my theater teacher at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. It was like funny little world. Yeah. But I